So Carol was born lower class, but she always had more than others had. She had called her. She said that her family was, even though that they were kind of living in poverty, they always seemed to have more than the other people that like lived on her street or her neighbors did. And so she found herself really priding herself on like sort of going without if she could help someone else. She became like the kid that everybody else kind of went to if they were in crisis or needed help, and then she was just very resourceful. She did her best to take care of her siblings and really prided herself on her role as a caretaker and got a lot of positive reinforcement for being a good sibling, a good friend, a good daughter. And she really paid a lot of attention to that feedback that she was getting and how she kind of absorbed it. And I think that's one of the reasons why when she became an adult, it was so important for her to start that atmosphere of her own. Her family was always taking in people when they needed somewhere to stay, and because of the multicultural community that she lived in, it was very common, she said, that for people to come that didn't speak English. And so she would find a way to communicate with their kids and try to find a way to get their children to tell her like what they needed in order for her to sort of help them acquire it. So she joked that she was never a social worker, but her first social worker position was when she was in preschool. Her family, or her community played more, her whole community kind of went to the same, or was a church-based community, but the church was sort of the backdrop for the focus was more on community outreach and kind of like working together as a team. They did it at the church, but she said most of the time she remembers being at the church. She doesn't remember ever being there at a service. It was more kind of a landing place for everyone to get together. She put herself through college with loans. She did not have anybody in her family or anyone in her community that was deaf, but one of the things that I found really interesting was that she wanted to learn how to communicate with hearing impaired people so that she could kind of help bridge the gap between the deaf community and the hearing community. When I had asked her what made her want to do that, she said, I don't know anything about them, and I don't know how to learn anything about them if I can't speak their language, and they can't speak mine, or some of them can't speak mine, so I need to learn theirs. And so I thought that was really, it was a really cool way to look at the world, that, you know, if there was something that there didn't ever seem to be something that she could not accomplish. She started researching adoption when she was at college, and then when she landed her job out here in Delaware County, she was an hour away from her family. So that was another thing that sort of made things difficult when she became a young adult and wanted to start a family. She didn't have that like support system from family, so because they weren't there, she had to kind of create one. There was things that worked against her as a single parent of adopted children. One with work, if she needed to take off, or there was only one of her because she did not have a spouse. And so when that happens, if there's an event at school or a behavioral issue at school or something like that, she had to take off. And she said one of the most amazing things was she felt like her job made sure that was never a problem. They never second-guessed her work ethic. They never second-guessed her place as a mother. And they found the same value on her being present for her children that they did. Interestingly enough, she said that if she had a spouse, she doesn't think that she would have been granted those sort of permissions or those abilities, because like if she had a spouse that just wasn't involved, his existence would have prevented her from being the mom she could be if he wasn't there, if that makes sense. Another thing that she kind of had an obstacle up against, and people sort of snubbed their nose a lot, was that she was a white mom raising kids that were not white. And so there was a lot of question, a lot of comment, a lot of kind of ridicule behind her back about, you know, could she even effectively raise these children that weren't hers, and how could she raise them knowing about who they are and, you know, help them be productive members of society with the behavioral issues that they had. people kept telling her to give, like, very racist things. Like, people were telling her to give him back to his country because of their behaviors. Like, oh, you know, you did so much for them already, send them back. Which is funny that people would say that about kids when they wouldn't say them about their biological children. And Carol felt very much like these were her children. They were her kids. So to send them back because they were struggling. She kept saying, like, they were having a hard time. They weren't giving me a hard time. And she couldn't understand why people couldn't see that. The fact that they were associating their behavior with their race seemed crazy to her, and she couldn't figure out where that was coming from. Especially because in her experience, her growing up and her experience in early adulthood and kind of surrounding herself with people that were different than her, it didn't really resonate with her that people even still felt that way until she was experiencing it firsthand. Psychosocial crisis resolution. Discuss biopsychosocial factors or events that may have facilitated and or inhibited the resolution of the crisis. So I think one of the things that really facilitated her kind of deciding to have intimacy and become a mother when she wanted to, and have these relationships with her children versus the isolation of potentially being alone, the fact that she decided to start her family without even waiting for somebody else to be part of it, I think that was one of the things that really facilitated her growth, her strong values, and the way that she really valued being a caretaker, and the way that she saw that reflected back to her as a young child, and the importance of being a caretaker, and how that was always valued both in her work experience as a young adult and also as also when she was a child, and her family and her community really appreciated those attributes that she had. The fact that she was raised in poverty and she was what she would call scrappy, really kind of facilitated her, the way that she was able to navigate a lot of these social issues, and the way that she was able to kind of raise 3 children on her own on a one-person income. That's not an easy task. Some of the things that inhibited was that she was raised in poverty. If she had, been raised her parents were able to pay her loans, and she was raised, with a silver spoon in her mouth, she would have had more opportunities. Her postpartum after all 3 adoptions, and her depression after all 3 of them, wasn't really something that was openly talked about then at that time. And it was certainly, it's taboo to talk about now even, but it certainly was not something that was talked about after an adoption. I don't think that people thought that postpartum was even a thing that could happen after a child was adopted. She talked very much about feeling called to adopt all of her children and loved all of her children and has absolutely no regrets. She did feel at the time very isolated with their behavior and that lack of help. There was a lot of shame in the sense that, like, she didn't want to she worried about reaching out to people when their behavior was difficult, because she worried that people would say, just send them back, or they had like a lot of these really abrupt answers for the behavioral issues, and kind of like a what did you expect was going to happen type of a thing. And when you're, a young adult and sort of coming into your own and just figuring out where you are as an individual and as a mother, and you're doing it on your own without somebody to bounce those thoughts off of, that's definitely not a helpful thing to hear. I think being raised in poverty both facilitated and inhibited the resolution of this psychosocial crisis of intimacy versus isolation. Adversity happening allows a person to test their resiliency. A person who can trust has the ability to develop resiliency when adversity happens. So I think because of Carol's upbringing, and she felt very supported and very loved and very nurtured, and not only was she nurtured, but her caretaking attributes were nurtured as well. When she started to feel that adversity of the poverty, she never felt it in the sense that she couldn't bounce back from it. Like she was able to trust that she would be okay. And she was able to develop that resiliency. So being raised in a poor environment and being food insecure, is what that's supposed to say, gave her the ability to adapt and be resilient. Her secure attachment gave her the ability to adapt in general. Due to her experience, due to her experiences, she would have had points on her ACEs score, which is indicative of having negative impacts on one's social, emotional, and cognitive health. Apologize. All right. So discuss biosocial factors or events that may have facilitated or inhibited the resolution of a psychosocial crisis. Apply multi-systems lens. Okay, so some of the things that facilitated her intimacy kind of winning out versus isolation was that Carol made a community wherever she went. She talks about different stages in her life and different chapters in her life in early adulthood, different groups of friends that she still maintains. She has all of these different kind of communities that she gets herself involved in, and she volunteers, and she's got a church community and adoption support group communities and very strong networks that she creates. She said she very strategically and in a very happy way created these little pockets and villages of places that she and her children could feel safe, especially just to maintain that safety, because if she needed to call on somebody as a single working parent, she never felt like there wasn't an abundance of people that would have been there for her. And when her family was so far away, that really made a difference, and it made a difference in her children's lives feeling this community support. And that the community cares. People offering to help because of single motherhood was something that really facilitated her ability to do that. She mentioned more than one occasion, like especially years like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it was definitely more accepted for a father to not contribute and to contribute financially, but not necessarily with the kids. And because of that, she said that a lot of her friends really suffered in silence, and she always felt kind of guilty that she never had to because she was a single parent. People were willing to help out, but the presence of a husband actually made it more difficult if they weren't a participating member of the family, in the sense that with the child rearing. Alex was able to get services because of his intellectual and his physical disabilities, and this really helped out. Family was supportive, but not close enough, did not discuss feelings about things being hard. So she didn't want to burden her family with anything, and that's kind of what she was saying. So that's why she created community everywhere she went. Some things that inhibited her ability to, or she felt like could have gotten in the way of her success, her family's success in her early adulthood is the sexism of kind of being turned down for things or not taken seriously because she was a woman with 3 children. People weren't always kind about the fact that she was raising children that were not white, and she also really kind of experienced discrimination because of Alex's disability. People were really intimidated and uncomfortable by the fact that he needed to walk with supports or a wheelchair, and there was a lot of discrimination because of that in apartments that she couldn't rent, or people weren't comfortable watching him. So it added a whole nother layer of hardship as a single mom. She was always she very much said that she was raised to be grateful, though, and she didn't feel comfortable saying that she had it bad when somebody always had it worse. And she tried to instill that into her kids while validating how they felt, but also making sure that they were still giving of service, because that's what was important to her, and it was an important value. She said that she has no regrets and that she has done everything that she has ever wanted to do. She would have let herself have more ideas if she wasn't also fighting against what was inhibiting her. But she feels really proud of the life that she's lived so far. Humanistic perspective. I thought this was one that was really interesting because the humanistic perspective focuses on the ways that people view their lives and their being. According to this perspective, people have a role in shaping their own experience, and there's no predetermined pattern of personality, and someone's views on one's life is what helps shape their personality. So I thought Carol had made what I thought was interesting was that Carol had made decisions about her life based on her personal values. She's an incredibly positive person, and when other people might turn away from a social problem, she gravitates towards it. her work with hearing impaired